I love eating giant slices of humble pie, and on today's podcast, I got to eat a lot of them because my dear friend Brandon Allen was on the show today, and he is the epitome of leadership. And I mean, not from just a philosophical level, an implementation level, an empowerment level, at a way that ensures that you build teams, hire teams, even if you have a VA, a virtual assistant, an agency that helps you, that ensures that they are operating in their power and supporting you and executing your vision and dreams. And this episode was jam-packed. And I mean, one of the most compressed masterclasses when it comes to leadership, when it comes to communication, when it comes to priorities, task management, and so many other things that it's even hard to articulate. And so this is going to be one of those episodes that you save, that you come back to, that you listen to, that you reference. And so we talk about curiosity and inquiry-based communication and how they're key traits for effective leadership, how effective leaders give more than they receive and need to find ways to fill their own bucket outside of leadership. We talk about how there's zero, and I mean no one-size-fits-all approach to leadership, and how leaders should develop their own unique leadership philosophy. Self-awareness, continuous learning, and open-mindedness are the key qualities of effective leaders. How hiring task managers instead of extracting value from employees is a common trap in entrepreneurship. How empowering employees and giving them the freedom to explore and make decisions is crucial for their growth and success of the business. And how leaders should be learners about people and discover their hidden talents and abilities. And there's so much more that I remember, like the 5 books he recommended that I've never read any of them that are now on my list, to all the 2 pages of notes that I took for me to be a better leader, for me to accomplish more, to serve more. This one is one for the ages. And so, Brandon, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for coming on the show and sharing your 25 plus years of knowledge with us, making it tangible, implementable. And so for everybody listening, strap in for this one, get a pen handy, or save the notes, or save the show to come back to many, many times, because we're about to rock it. So without further ado, let's get into the episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And I'm incredibly humbled and honored as I have a new friend who's, my direct connect away, since I take every flight out of Montana directly through his hometown because it's the only way to get there. But I connected with this incredible gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and very rarely do I jump on calls and I'm like, I could just listen to you all day because you complete every hole in my life, especially when it comes to business and entrepreneurship. But just incredibly impressed and excited because Brandon is here today, and Brandon is basically a plugged leak for every hole in my bucket when it comes to experience and leadership and building teams and really having process and system around getting there. And he has this entire background in managing massive operations, from banking to helping people, New York Times. And I have to say, he's a recovering podcast host right now because he told me this incredible story, and he's taking big choices and chances to be into alignment. And so, incredible man, incredible father. And I do have to say this because if asked to describe himself, and I can agree with this, funny, charming, interesting, and handsome. And so I vouch for all of that. And Brandon, I'm honored and humbled to have you on the show. So welcome.
Yeah. The problem with video is people are going to immediately know that the handsome thing is not true, but that's okay.
I will say the benefit that you have is more people listen to this than watch it on video. And so we're just gonna leave that disguise up, because I feel like the same way, as I'm just a 40-year-old dude with a mohawk and attempting to be cool in my life for my kids. And so I run into the same bucket all the time.
Yeah.
And so for everybody listening, I asked Brandon right before this, I was like, hey man, like I'm really feeling like this and bringing dessert. And he just dropped a masterclass on me in about 3 minutes. And I was like, it gave me goosebumps. And I was like, I need you to not only share this, but I also need you to let me take notes on this because it's profoundly powerful. And you have this incredible background in really, really coaching. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs here that want to build their company, scale their company. And a trap that you've noticed, and I've seen a ton of times, is people end up trying to hire people, and they end up hiring people for task managers and not really pulling out or extracting what the value is. And so I'm just going to shut up because how you unpacked this was like a masterclass in itself. But I would kind of love for you to take us to church on managing all of that and coaching and bringing all that into alignment.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to start with a quote. I didn't do this initially, but Steve Jobs once said that it doesn't make sense to hire people and then tell them what to do. He said, we hire smart people so they can tell us what to do. And when it comes to hiring, when it comes to building a team, at some point, every single entrepreneur is going to be faced with a decision that they need more help, whether that be because they want to scale or they want to maintain a certain lifestyle. We're going to need help. It's just inevitable. And so the question becomes like, how do I bring help in a way that really serves my business, not only in the short term, but also in the long term? And this is where business owners go wrong. We're smart people. We're capable. We got to where we got to because we know how to get things done and we know some things about some things. And so we bring that to the world. And when we bring people in, we're so worried that people are going to sully our brand or make us look bad or screw up. Heaven forbid someone make a mistake. When you become an entrepreneur, you learn you don't make those anymore. You stop making mistakes. And so heaven forbid if an employee comes in and makes a mistake on your behalf. But we worry about that. And look, we should care about our brand. We should care about the experience that we deliver to a customer. All those things are important. But the way we go about this is we bring someone in and then we constantly tell them what to do. And I've been guilty of this. And the funny thing was, I had an assistant that had worked for me for a long time. And I remember telling this woman every time our newsletter came out. Now, here's what's funny about it. Our newsletter came out at the same time every week, literally at the same time. But for some reason, she wouldn't post it until I told her, hey, here's the newsletter, post the newsletter. And it dawned on me after I'd been doing this probably for like a year. It's kind of embarrassing to say this, but I probably did this for like a year where I kept telling her, hey, do this thing. And then she would go and do the thing. She was a really good employee. I really loved working with her. And at one point I just stopped and I thought, why do I keep telling this person what to do? Why don't they just know? Now, what we tend to do sometimes is we blame the other person. Like if this person were more competent, if they were more capable, they would just take the bull by the horns and they would run with it. But when it comes to someone else's business, an employee is going to treat that with respect, and they're going to look for you to give them some direction on how far out I can play away from the house before I have to ask dad for permission to go any further. And so, in that process, I realized that I was the bottleneck here, that I, for some reason, felt like I had to keep telling her what to do and when to do it. And I realized that that is not an efficient use of our time. If we want to expand our capabilities and our capacities to serve other people, we have to equip and empower people to do work at a level that's independent from us, that allows them to explore what they do at the highest levels. And there's a lot of things that we do to disempower people. The most common one is we don't create an actual articulated role. So I look at every role in a business as a sandbox that people play in, and that has boundaries around the outside. This is how far you can go before you get me involved. But inside of this sandbox, you can do whatever you want, however you want to do it. Because what I've learned over the years and working with people in management for 25 years now is that a lot of times when I give my employees room to figure some things out, they actually are able to do that much better than I am. So having a defined role is really important, and empower them to do that work. When people ask questions, the most common response to the question is to answer the question. That seems really intuitive, right? Someone asks me a question, I'm going to answer it as a leader. I would suggest to you that you not answer your team's questions unless you absolutely have to. So it's not uncommon for me to tell a team member, hey, what would you do here? Or what do you think about this? Because I want them to have the confidence that, number one, they know what they're doing. They really do. And most of the time when you ask them this, they come up with an answer that you're like, yeah, you know what? That totally makes sense. And the second thing is I want to, just give them the opportunity to practice strategic thinking. And where we go wrong as leaders is we get our expert hat on and we're so smart that we think we need to answer every question that our employees have. And even worse, we feel like we need to tell employees what to do. So, George, I was talking to you about coaching, and this has been something on my mind because I've got a masterclass coming up on coaching, and I'm doing an Empowered Teams workshop where coaching will be a big part of this. Is it's really important for a leader to be a learner about people. It's really important for us to discover what are our team's hidden talents and abilities. And where we go wrong as leaders when we see employees is we create judgments about who they are and what they're capable of. In fact, I just got off a call that was a little bit disheartening with a client who really painted their employees in a pretty limited box. They just said, some of my employees, they're good. They're just going to be good. Some other of my employees, you know what? They just are who they are. They're never going to be good. And I think, man, they're never going to be good if your thought process is limiting them to what they're capable of. Now, it's true that some people aren't a fit. It's true that some people can't get to the place that maybe you want them to. Maybe their skill set just isn't the right fit. But having that kind of mindset is a limiter. So I'm always trying to discover if I have a team that, let's say you have a team member that does one thing that's the opposite of what you ask them to do. You ask them to do something, they do something completely different, even though to your face, they agree to do it. That's where I want to get curious. But our judgment comes in when we think that employee's uncommitted, they're lazy, they're disrespectful, whatever the limiter is that we put on them. Well, they can't be any better than that, right? Like they're never going to grow beyond the lid that you put on them. But as a coach in my leadership, I want to really be a learner and understand like, hey, what was the driving force between what you said you would do and what you actually did? And how can we figure out what that looks like? And I'm telling you, that process of coaching is so important, right? To make that inquiry and to allow that person to really go deep and to only allow yourself to ask them questions about why they made the decisions that they made and how they got there so that you can figure out what to do next. When I grew up working for my grandfather, I remember my grandfather used to tell me, don't make excuses. I don't want to hear your excuses. And we've probably all heard this from a parent or a boss or someone else. The challenge with that is I actually want to hear an employee's excuses because in their excuses is the solution to the problem. Now, whatever their excuse is on the surface, it's actually much deeper than that. And so I always think about a proverb, chapter 20, verse 5. It says, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters. One who has insight draws them out. And so there's what people let us see on the surface in their performance, but there's what's much deeper than that I really want to get to because everyone has competing commitments in life. They have what they want and what they believe. And a lot of times those two things don't go together. So it's helping them to see the gap that they have there so that they can move forward. And when we can bring some of these skills to our management and the way that we build a team, we can have a team that runs independently, that runs in a really organized fashion, that really allows us to expand our capabilities and the value that we deliver for other people. So that's
hold on. That was a 15-year summary of things that I could never articulate as clearly as you just did. And it just speaks to your expertise. I am like, yes, 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 and yes. It reminds me, and I have a few notes. So first, I need to call out that quote that you just said. They are never going to grow past the lid that we put on them.
Yeah.
And I had an incredible mentor years ago who said, your job when you hire an employee is not to keep them where they are. It's to help them outgrow you and become the best versions of themselves.
Yeah.
And that has stuck with me forever because there's this fear of like, oh, they're the best. I can't let them go, or I need to keep them in this box instead of how do I pull the best out of them? And even on I love this. Like, I feel so called out and so seen at the same time of like always having the answer versus using declarative language and asking questions. And I even saw Dan Martell, who I love to pieces, do a clip on this. And he calls it like the 3-1-1 rule. He's like, if an employee comes to you with a question, ask them 3 ways that they might do it, the one that they're the most confident in, and the one thing they need from support with you. And I'm like, yes, like that. And I even now at the point, and Ashley, I love you to pieces. I love you to pieces, but she'll message me. I'm like, why are you messaging me? Your ideas are 1,000 times better than mine. And every time I think I know, I'm putting it in our own box of like eliminating possibility because of that like perfection mindset, or I've done this before, or I've been an entrepreneur and I have that expert hat on.
Yeah.
And the way that you just articulated that was like surgery on my soul. And I do have a question though, because even in hearing you speak, like you're so, the word that comes to mind is like empathetic, but it's also like curiosity based, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like, especially in entrepreneurship, you know, I've been in this for almost 2 decades as well. There's this trap that we fall into in these like linear questions or these labels or these surface things. And so, do you have any like insights or tips on how to really like operate with that curiosity
Yeah.
or like that inquiry to be able to communicate well? Because one of the things that you talked about is like, here's your sandbox and here's your bumpers, but let's explore what happens inside of that. And I feel like it's this artful communication that's not taught often. And I would
Yeah.
kind of love to hear your thoughts on that.
There's some declarative statements that I'm going to try to recall from memory that I use to stay in the right frame of mind with a client or with an employee. Okay. The first one is this person is whole and complete. They're not damaged. They're not broken. They're not terrible. That person that I'm talking to in that moment is whole and complete. It's convicting, though, if we're being honest, to see every person that we come across in life as whole and complete. I promise you, I don't always do that. And I know that's really hard to do, but I have to stay mindful of this person is whole and complete. And I'll give it an example, and I'll get into the rest of these of a quote that really changed the way I think about this. And it's by Timothy Galway, who wrote the book, The Inner Game of Tennis. And Tim Galway said, this is how he talked about human development, and I've never forgot it. And I'm going to paraphrase this because there's some things I'm probably going to miss here as I recount this from memory. But he said when someone takes a rose seed and they plant it into the ground, they don't criticize it as being underdeveloped. They give it the water and the nourishment that it needs to grow. And then when it pops up out of the ground as a stem, we don't criticize it as being rootless and underdeveloped. We continue to give it the care that it needs to become, what it needs to become. And he said, a rose is a rose from the time that it's planted in the ground, from the time that it dies. But its whole life, it has its entire potential inside of them. We just have to be patient with the process to let that develop and come out in that rose. So my job is to be the environment that growth happens and allow that person's human potential, which already exists, right? And this is probably disheartening for some people, and maybe it's really hopeful for people, but all of your potential that you have in your whole life already exists inside of you. Everything that you're capable of is already there, but we put limiting beliefs, we put past interactions, past successes, past failures. We put all these things in between our potential and where we're at now that keeps us from expressing that fully. So looking at someone as whole and complete is really powerful because it's true. There's nothing going to be given to you that is going to allow you to express your full potential. Like, I'm not going to see UPS show up one day on my doorstep, hand me a box, I open it, and inside there's a card that says, Brandon, your full potential as a human being, here it is. You've been waiting for it. Love the creator or whatever, right? Wherever I might get that from. So everyone that I come across is whole and complete. Number two, this person is contributing to me right here, right now. Everyone I come in contact with is contributing value to me. This is really hard as well because we can think a lot of people that we think, I don't know if this person is really contributing value to me, but I look for the ways that this person does contribute value to me. The third thing, this person has his or her own answers. They have their own answers. I don't need to have the answers for their lives. In fact, they're the expert on their lives, not me. Number four, this person is 100% committed to the matter in their life that we're discussing right now. I'm going to treat them as 100% committed. So those are four things that come to mind that help me to empathize and to put that person in a position of power in their own life and to treat them like they're committed that they're engaged and that they're excited about whatever it is that we're trying to move forward in. Because if I do it any other way, I'm going to hold back, because why would I work with someone full out if they're not 100% committed? I would be a fool to do that. So I'll hold back and not play full out. That robs them of the opportunity to get the best from me. And it also, it just keeps me from feeling like I'm doing everything I can also to really help and support that person as well.
God, like you are, and I know I've said this, but you are a breath of fresh air. I am so glad that you exist in the world, because this is magic. And for everybody listening, and I don't know if you've read this book, but I've recommended this before, but there's an incredible book from the pathologist who basically created the curriculum for my son's school. It's called The Declarative Language Handbook by Linda Murphy. And it is a tool to have in the toolbox on how to communicate and how to speak. And it's written through the lens of how to communicate to children who don't have an internal paradigm, to be able to allow them to find their own reasoning and create their own narrative. But it was actually studied by adults. And even hearing you saying this is just like kudos to that for me, and having that. And I love those rules. Every person I see is whole and complete. This person right here is contributing to me in this situation right now. This person has his or her own answers, and this person is 100% committed to the matter in their life we're discussing. Like, that is a set of bumpers and standards that also create depth and connection. And I think, for me, I remember being in the Marine Corps. Team was not something we chose. It was something we were given. And, like I tell everybody, I'm like, you want to learn how to be a leader, try to go to war with people you can't fire and hire somebody else who hate each other most of the days, and then get to work together. But there was this level of depth that was created as people. And I feel like even a trap that I fell into early entrepreneurship was having a team, but the team was more so about check boxes and roles than it was about the shared mission and vision. And I actually have a question on this, because this comes up all the time. Like, you and I both do consulting, we both do coaching. And one of the things that I see people fall into this trap on, and I feel like it used to work this way, but in the world we're in now, there's really no linear tasks anymore. It's like in spiral dynamics, it's teal, right? Like you can be in 8 buckets. Like we used to be able to hire a social media manager and they had a job, but now that encompasses like 17 different roles from Sunday. And so how do you navigate or manage roles and responsibilities now in the lens of like outcomes versus these, like, for example, linear boxes that we tend to put people in that really just end up creating that gopher that we talked about like before the show?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky balance, because one of the tenets of psychological safety for people is certainty. So Dr. David Rock wrote a book called Your Brain at Work. They hooked people up to functional MRIs, and they said, what kind of stimulus keeps people in a reward status at work? Which basically means, how do we keep people out of fight, flight, or freeze? Certainty is one of those things. And so where a lot of entrepreneurs go wrong is they leave it really open-ended. And they're like, hey, just choose your own adventure. Well, the problem is when we give people too much choice, they freeze. They're just like, I don't know what to do with that much choice, because we don't live in a world that is unlimited that way. We have very specific boundaries in school. We have very specific boundaries in corporate work that we follow, right? We do X and Y happens. It's very cookie cutter, very easy to follow. So when we give people that level of flexibility, it's almost too much flexibility. So I like to create a mix of, number one, understanding who is it that I'm working with and what are they great at? What do they enjoy? And then how do they create outcomes? And what are the most important things that they need to accomplish utilizing those skills in my organization? And so we're going to create a role and we're going to put it on paper, because I'm a big believer in that. But we're also going to review it on a regular basis to make sure that that person is still operating in a place that they really want to. And this is what's hard about leadership, is we want to do something once and then we never want to do it again. So I'll have people come to me in a management sense and they'll be like, how do I fix these people so I don't have to talk to them or engage with them? Like, how could I just fix all their problems so they don't bug me? And the answer to that is you don't. There's always going to be things that you need to work on and that you're going to be challenged by. And there's also going to be things that you need to revisit in the relationship. So their role in the relationship is one of those things. Look, this is true whether you're in a committed partnership relationship of some kind. Your friendships may have different roles that transpire over time, and at work that's going to be true. So I like to have regular rhythms, whether that be semi-annually or annually, where we might sit down and talk about that. How are you doing? How are you feeling about your role? In fact, realistically, I like to check in with this on a monthly basis in a more informal way. So I might take someone to coffee and I might say, hey, how are you feeling about your role? How are you feeling about your work product? How are you feeling about the things that the clients that you're working with, those kinds of things? As we're just grabbing a coffee, maybe taking a walk, just talking about life in general, just to get a feel for where is this person at and how is this person feeling about the work that they're doing? And do they feel stuck in a role that they're not excited about, or are they feeling pretty good about it? And, we can just keep things rolling moving forward. So I try to create a little bit of rigidity, but also with the opportunity that flexibility or change could happen at some future time frame so that they have something to look forward to.
Yeah, the one thing that always comes up for me is like being a parent,
Yeah.
right? Like it's the same thing. Like those things are renegotiated
Yeah.
sometimes on the daily, depending on the age of your kids,
Yeah.
but always protecting the same outcome or
Yeah.
adjusting that outcome. Now, I'm just innately curious because this is like a masterclass in leadership and communication. And I know, like, as an entrepreneur, like, this doesn't even just apply to like a full-time employee. Like, I would love to hear the nuances of like contractors or a part-time VA or, a full-time employee, because I feel like all too often it's so easy to fall into that trap of like, oh, well, I just hired this designer. That's all they're doing is this design, or
Yeah.
they just edit my podcast. But like, even though they might be 1099 and outside your company, they're still a core component on influencing those inputs in the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. Well, I think about, as you ask that question, I think about a mantra that Trader Joe's uses that each manager or what they call captain uses to run their store. And that's, there's 1,000 right ways. So you may hire a designer and you could say, hey, design something, I don't know, make it fancy. And ironically, I used to have a web development and design business. I'm not personally a designer, but I did a lot of the strategic, work behind the brand and the creatives for clients. And I had a partner that did a lot of the creatives on paper. And it was always interesting. We would do a website project for people back in the day. And this is like 15, 16 years ago. And people would say, well, I don't know, you're the expert. Just make something nice. And I always got so nervous about that because I thought, man, you don't even know what you want. And it's very likely that whatever we deliver in our first round, you're absolutely going to hate. And it always happened that way. And so people would say, hey, you're the expert, just do what you do. And then we would turn something out that we thought was pretty good. And people would be like, nah, not like that. Do what you want, but not like that. And we would always joke about that. So every good relationship has agreements. Your relationship with your spouse or your partner, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your employees, contractors, vendors, every good relationship has agreements. So it's true that a 1099 employee has flexibility, but there should be agreements that you create with that person right up front to say, listen, if you're going to work for me, here's the things that I would like to request of you. And then provided that you're okay with that, we will ratify that request as an agreement. And then we will be bound to that. And when I say bound to it, only so far as you actually uphold the limits and the actual agreement itself through confrontation and communication and those things, but we will be bound to those agreements. So whether that's a virtual assistant or a contractor or someone that you've hired, as a company to manage your marketing, all these things. And the whole process of creating this, I think what gets really tricky, I'll use accounting as a good example because I've had people tell me, well, Brandon, I've hired 10 accountants and they all suck. He's like, what do you think is my problem? And I'm like, the client. The client is the problem. Like, you hired 10 accountants and they all suck. Like, they suck. I'm like, that's a client problem. That's not an accountant problem. And a lot of times people don't know enough about whatever they're hiring for to make good agreements. So if I hire a marketing person, I'm just like, well, market, make it rain. Where are my leads? Where are my customers? You're doing a terrible job. You're fired. And they've worked with you for like 2 weeks, right?
Yep.
And so, we don't know enough about those things sometimes to make good agreements. So it's important to do our homework and to make those agreements so I can say, hey, what should I be seeing here? What do we want to agree upon? That if I do this and I show up this way and you show up this way, these are the things that are likely to happen. And if they don't, let's go back to the table and talk about renegotiating our agreements or talking about changing the way we do things or whatever. So I'm a big believer in agreements and really understanding how do we create a container for us to work together that we both agree upon.
Yeah, I'd say that like one of the biggest things, and even just add kudos to what you said, is that I watch most people, and I've fallen into this trap of when hiring, also advocating clarity on the other party and ending up in these buckets of unspoken expectations,
Yeah.
which just leads to brokenness on
Yeah.
both sides.
Yeah.
And I actually think now, and what I'm seeing at least, it's the most prevalent it's ever been, because everything changes so quick. And even in the lens of marketing, which is, you know, what I live my life in, there used to be times where like, yeah, this thing will work for 9 months or 12 months or 6 months. And now it's like, you get 3 days and you better have like 4 tests in the pocket ready to go. Right. And so there is this mutual responsibility, but also with employees, with companies, with people that you're hiring. Those agreements aren't one-sided creations. They're combinations of both parties agreeing that these are the ingredients and this is the container. And I feel like that's a lost art that we've got into this like transact, check a box, check a box, check a box. And then the trap just ends up closing the door and everybody suffers.
Yeah.
Everybody suffers.
Absolutely.
And when you said that a minute ago with the client, the problem, I used to get in so much trouble in the Marine Corps because I was in IT for a while and I had to work at the help desk. And I was like, sir, I think the problem lies somewhere between the chair and the keyboard. And I would get written up all the time. And I was like, yeah. Like at some point we got to look in the mirror. And, that brings me to a question, because I'm in love with your perspective, and also like the depth of clarity and the most simplistic ways that you bring these clarity. But I feel like this label of like leadership or leading a team is something that like we put this label on, like there's this finish line or there's this check box or leadership is telling them what to do. But in your opinion or in your expertise, like what are some of the traits or skills or habits or behaviors that like leaders should envelop? Because when I think about the role of leadership, it's not that you're buried behind the laptop doing work. Like you're on the field with people, and we end up growing so much in that process. But I feel like it can end up in this inundated cycle where you're checking boxes all day, you're self-sacrificing, and you're also really big on like productivity and time management. And so I'd kind of love to hear your perspective on like what it takes to be an effective leader.
Yeah. So there's 2 things I'll say about this, because we could say a lot about it, but 2 things that I feel like are really important. Number one, and I got this from Pat Lencioni. He was on a podcast once, and he said this. He said, the personal economics of leadership are rarely in the leader's favor. You're always going to give more than you get. And when he said that, I thought, how many times have I been guilty of not feeling served as a leader or appreciated or thanked? And then I get upset and I get into this victim mentality about what it means to be a leader. So if you're not ready to pour out more than you get, don't be a leader. Just don't do it. Don't have kids. Don't have a team. Go work somewhere and be just a cog in the wheel, and your life will be infinitely better. And listen, there's people who make this choice. I respect the hell out of it. There's nothing wrong with it. There's some people who say, I don't want that responsibility. It does not sound fun to me. In fact, I get a little scared most of the time with people who are eagerly excited about the leadership opportunity, because now I know they're going to lord that they're going to lord that authority over me in a way that's going to be terrifying. And so I'm a little nervous about someone who's overly enthusiastic to lead, because if we're really thinking about it, it's scary. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. I've experienced this in my own leadership. And so just recognize right up front that you're going to be in the business of giving and pouring out, which means that you've got to find ways outside of leadership to fill your bucket. That's really important, whether that be other relationships, working out, whatever it is that you enjoy doing, make sure you're filling your bucket. The second thing is there's a lot of great ways to lead. And I think where we get feeling inadequate, where we go wrong as leaders, is we try to lead like someone else. And there's not a blueprint for, hey, every leader should do this, every leader should do that. If you look at any type of leadership positions, you'll see people who are vastly different leaders lead in wildly different ways, but still be effective in their own right. And so one of the classes that I teach at the University of Utah is leadership philosophy and creating a leadership philosophy. And what I do is I create a philosophy that reminds me of what my strengths are as a leader, but it also helps to remind me of what my weaknesses are so that I can play to my strengths while moving away from my weaknesses. So I'll give you an example. Number one, everyone that I see has value. I want to see everyone that I come across as having value. I would love to tell you I wrote that down because it's my strength. It is not. I have a tendency to use people like tools. I have a tendency to be a real dominating bastard. I can be a really challenging person when I'm not in a good frame of mind. It reminds me to remember that every person that I'm interacting with has value and to treat them accordingly. So that's just one example of my leadership philosophy that, helps me to play away from a weakness to remember what's really important in those engagements and interactions. And so those two things, remembering the personal price that you're going to pay to be a leader and creating a philosophy that's uniquely yours, that plays to your strengths and away from your weaknesses, will help you to function well as a leader.
I can't leave you as the only one crucifying himself on the pulpit. And
Sure.
I will tell you that leadership for me is I survive and thrive off humble pie now because I eat so much of it every single day. And the entire reason this podcast, my business, and everything is taught the way that it is because I did it all the opposite way, the same way.
Yeah.
Upsells, transactions, numbers, and money. And I was like, where can I not hide from the world? I'm like, I'll just like the whole world hold me accountable to being in my heart and being connected at like the deepest level, because it is truly, truly, that is the best, most articulate take I've ever heard on leadership philosophy. And I am so in love with it because environmentally, I still know that my default is when I'm stressed and I'm overwhelmed, I'm like, on to the next, on to the next. And I had a personal development coach. She's like, yeah, but have you ever turned around to look at the trail of dead bodies behind you?
Yeah.
And it broke me. Like, it broke me. And I was like, I care so much about people. But my friend Simon Bowen says this all the time. He says, nobody chooses to self-sabotage. They accidentally behave their way away from it. And for me as a leader, it's about holding myself accountable to the standards that I value and that I crave, and not expecting anybody else to. And even in the point, and screw it, because I'd love your thoughts on this one, because this is something I work through often. Also realizing that my role as a leader is not to create intrapersonal codependency because I'm not getting my needs met outside of that bucket, and having that expectation over and over to where, like, Ashley, you're a saint and I love you and you know this and we talk about this all the time, but that line in leadership of like connection and empathy versus like intimacy is a very, very thin line, because a trap I fell into as a leader all the time is I would almost use emotion and my own pain to guilt people into having an investment into something that was not their responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That one tickles.
Yeah. That's tough.
That one tickles. And I think too, and one of the things that I'd love to kind of hear your take on, and because this is just so money, in that same lesson, in renegotiating these containers and these monthly outcomes, is also renegotiating my own, because there is no finish line for us as
Yeah.
well. And leadership, in my opinion, is not perfect. It's quite frankly the opposite. It's imperfect. Yes, I'm sorry, let's renegotiate. Yes, I'm sorry, let's renegotiate. And so, with you, like, I can even hear it in the undertone of everything that you do. Like, everything feels so outcome based and efficient and effective. But like, what are some of the tools or thought processes or ways that you envelop that personally to be able to operate like this? Because it sounds like you have it all figured out, and you're in this and massively self-aware, but there's 20 plus years of reps to get there. And I would just kind of love to hear how you think about your own lens as growing as a leader, and like what you tend to focus on and how you structure your day, or what thought processes you put yourself through to be able to be this aware.
Yeah. I mean, I just think life is a series of relationships. And I don't mean relationships to other people, but examining how I relate to everything that's put in front of me. So if something bothers me, what is it about that thing that bugs me? What is going on if I'm reading something? What do I think about that? I'm always looking for things that are going to push my buttons. And I think we have a tendency today, and this is how it feels. And I don't know if it's 100% true, but I feel like people want to play in their lane, and they only want to play in their lane. So heaven forbid if we should expose our kids or anything else to ideas that we don't espouse. So I know a lot of people get worried about that. Now I'm a parent. I have 4 kids, and they're reasonably old. One's an adult, launched. But I never worried about that, because I'm like, look, I have influence. But if they feel more compelled by another idea that they have, that's their choice. Like, I don't have to make that choice for them. So I've always felt like there's no, like, the rule is that there are no rules. There's always something new to learn, and I'm always open to changing my mind as much as I possibly can, right? And I'd love to tell you that, like, I'm the most open-minded person in the world. I'm not, but I'm open to be wrong. I'm open to change my mind about something if someone presented me information that I felt like was maybe more compelling than what my thoughts or feelings were about that. So I'm always looking to expand my ideas by expanding my horizons with what I'm reading, what I'm watching, who I'm talking to, what experiences that I'm having, all those kinds of things to kind of help form that growth. Having people speak into my life, and talk to me about things that I can't see, hold the mirror up so I can look into it and ask myself, do I really like this part of where I'm at and what I'm doing, and be open to that, right? So whether that be, again, coaching, therapy, mentoring, support groups, you name it, just having those spaces where I can be in relationship, and through those relationships to other things or other people, I can start to get a better idea of how people see me, how I show up, and also what else is there for me to learn? Like, where do I really get bugged? And then I know that's a growth opportunity for me in that area, if there's something that's really got me triggered in that regard. So that's probably, I don't know if I worry that's a little overly philosophical or
No,
light,
it's
but
spot on. It's
yeah,
spot on. And I see it too, at a deep level. One of my mentors a long time ago said, my favorite quote said, "A student says I already know, and a master says thanks for the reminder."
yeah,
And it's never left me. And what you talked about in people being insulated in their bubble, as a consultant, right? And in marketing and customer journey, like, I consult on people connecting with their customers at the deepest level. I also never publicly acknowledge that it's the most effacing mirror that you will ever find, is being directly connected to the people that you're trying to influence, which is why I spend so much of my time in the weeds. But what I also don't talk about is how it feels like I'm having surgery with no anesthesia every day, getting direct feedback from so many people or coaching so many people, and really being able to take that in to the point where, like, I even coined a term for myself called the tickle test, because I remember one of my personal development coaches, she's like talking to me, and I was in this course, and she's like, well, you lie about this. I'm like, no, I don't. And she's like, well, you lie about this. I'm like, no, I don't. And I just kept getting really, really animated. And then she's like, well, you're a purple dinosaur. And all of a sudden I'm like, no, I'm not. And she's like, notice your energy. And I was like, oh no. And she's like, yeah, because your nervous system can only respond to what you know to be true.
Yeah.
And so now, like, I love diving in with inversion theory to like opposing views and opposing books and like things that challenge my thoughts. And I'm like, if this tickles me, like if my body twitches, if I turn away, if I close my eyes, I'm like, well, I just found the next 30 days of my silent work that I'm not going to tell anybody about. But I love, because of what you said earlier about there is no right way to do leadership and there is no right perspective to have. It's really a series of figuring out on your values and then putting it into practice. And for me, I think one of the biggest thing that's been missing in the last couple of years is that outside perspective, because people go to these events and they go and they end up getting validation for their current views.
Yeah.
And then it just deepens the endowment. And so, as philosophical as it was, I feel like it lands and tickles at like the deepest level.
Can I say one other thing about what
Please.
you just said?
Yeah.
So I just want people to try this on, but you said something that made me think of this. When we say we're good at something, right? The conclusion, my experience with working with people now in a coaching capacity, like for the last 16 years, is that's a thing you need to work on. And here's the paradox of the whole thing. The things you think you suck at, you're probably pretty good at in a lot of ways, right? It's because you're more aware and you're more open to the thing that you are. And so because you're so tuned into who you are, you also see how often you're not that thing and it bothers you. This is why finding our strengths and what we're really good at sometimes can feel really confusing, because sometimes the things that we're really resistant to will throw up the barrier of, well, I'm good at that. And every time someone says that, I'm like, well, that's where we're going to stop. And we're going to have a conversation about that, versus the person who says, man, I'm not really good at that. I'm not a good dad. I'm not a good leader. I'm not, and then, you start to explore that. And what you realize is that person's incredible in those areas. But because they see and they're so intimately invested in it, they see all the times that they're out of integrity in that area that they care about. And so it's just one of those things to really pay attention to in personal development.
Yeah, I literally am so glad that you presence that, like so glad, because I don't know if you've ever felt this, but I talk to people very close to me and everybody that are my mentors and friends, and I was like, I feel more unqualified to do what I do now than I ever have in my life, and I feel like I know nothing anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer I'm in this,
yeah,
the less and less qualified. I cry myself about it a lot. And and I haven't shared this publicly, but there was a season where I'm like, oh, that's going to be good. That's going to be good. And now I have this barometer. If I record something, if I do a podcast, I'm like, oh, that's good. I delete it. And I'm like, if I'm not scared that like this isn't going to land or that it didn't stretch me a little bit, I'm like, I can't do it. But it's like my mind has been erased of like all the quote unquote answers that I hid behind for so long. And it's a confronting place, like at a very deep level. And, it reminds me that like there's no finish lines. God tickles me quite often with these, and he likes to remove them when I think they're there.
Yeah.
But dissonance is the word that comes up, but it's not necessarily a bad cognitive dissonance. It's just really like the work is never done, and I get to earn it every single day.
Yeah.
And it's been crazy. It's been crazy. I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that is like just such a valid point. And I've even said to people, they're like, how are you so good at coaching me? I'm like, well, I just listened for 2 minutes and you told me everything I needed to hear. You're like, I'm good here. I'm good here. I'm good here. I'm like, great, let's start there.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, and even a question I asked earlier about like, how do you know where to focus on or what principles to have as a leader, I'd say being aware of the traps that we put ourselves in, right? Like
Yeah.
the moment we think we know, we're just closing off all the possibility of divergent thinking and other ways in
Yeah.
which it could happen, because there's 1,000 right ways to do it. And that linear thinking reminds me of Alex Sharfin, and he says, you don't have the business you want because you haven't become the person to run it, because
Yeah.
literally what got you here, I promise, is just going to
Right.
keep you here. And there's this like innate curiosity, which is genuinely, and I'm sure you have the same thing because you have 4 kids, like why I love hanging out with my son who's 8. Like we were laying in bed last night and I was like, buddy, what's something about the world that you want to know? And he's like, Dad, I want to know what the fastest submarine is. What's the smallest mammal in the world? Like, what's the easiest way to do this? And it like starts unlocking parts of my
Yeah.
brain where I'm like, I never thought about that. I never even
Yeah.
assumed that that would be a possibility. And so I genuinely love that. Random question that hit my intuition, because you've dropped some like really good book recommendations that I haven't read, and I wrote them down, but I would love to hear like what, some of your favorite or top books are when it comes to like leadership or perspective, or kind of to become the level of where you are, because like I'm just humbled and impressed and I want to write them all down selfishly and go dive in.
Man. Okay. I'll give you 5.
Okay.
Number 1, and I'm going to make this recommendation, and everyone who listens to this, who reads this book, is going to like me and hate me at
Yep.
the same time. It's
Best book
called The Bonds
recommendations.
That Make Us Free by C. Terry Warner. I used to fashion myself as a person who didn't entertain a lot of victim thinking. And then I read that book and I'm like, damn, I'm a victim in a lot of different areas. So I remember I read this book on vacation and my wife asked me, are you okay? And I was like, I don't know. I'm like, this book is really screwing with me right now. And so The Bonds That Make Us Free, C. Terry Warner, which leads me to my second book, which is by the Arbinger Institute, which C. Terry Warner, I don't know if he founded it, but he was ahead of it at one point, called Leadership and Self-Deception. The way that we deceive ourselves in leadership, and sometimes it's really subtle. So that's a second book I would recommend. A third one being Change Your Questions, Change Your Life by Marilee Adams. Again, that's the paradigm of learner versus judger and how we get into that space. Number 4 is really one of the best management type of books that I've ever read. High Output Management by Andrew Grove. He was the CEO of Intel. Man, it's just so good in terms of how do you manage, how do you scale. It's a really good book. I really like it. And then I'm going to go back to like an oldie but goodie. This is the one that actually started me on a journey, because I didn't start out being a good leader. I had some challenges in that regard, but this book helped to shape a different way of looking at things. And it was by Marcus Buckingham, called First Break All the Rules. And this is an older book, but man, that book really was the thing that just started to change my attitude about management and the way that I led teams and created engagement. It just really opened up my world to a whole different level of possibilities.
See, I am so glad that I asked, because I've only heard of one of those and not the other ones. And I am excited because that first one tickles immensely, because
Oh,
I
yeah.
found my own path into that one
Yeah.
many different ways. And it's
Yeah.
one that I like to represent all the time of where I'm falling into that trap,
Yeah.
for sure.
Don't read it on vacation. That's all
Yeah,
I'm going to say.
yeah. Environmentally design yourself to be in the right bucket for that one, or you might
Yes.
have a different vacation. I
Yeah.
already know the undertone of that book, and so I like how you prefaced and pre-handled that one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Now, I have one question before we land the show, but because of this, and I want to know, I know you're kind of sunsetting the podcast, but your podcast has been an incredible resource, and so is your website and company. But if you wouldn't mind kind of telling people where they can hear more of you, download more of this, because like I'm just a massive fan, and then I'll ask the last question.
Yeah. So you can go to newworkrevolution.com. That's New Work Revolution. Named it that because I have this crazy notion that people should enjoy the work environments that they work in. I know that's crazy. you can check out I have two podcasts. One's a limited, just a one series podcast called The New Work Standard. It's called A Leader's Guide to Giving a Shit. The second one is called Growth and Freedom. And that's a leadership podcast as well. You can find those anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can find me on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, you name it.
Everywhere. We'll make sure that we link everything in the show notes for everybody to be really, really easy. And then I'm really excited about this one because I feel like you're a walking piece of wisdom, but also at both the 30,000, 20,000, and 10,000 view, and you integrate them all pretty well. And so I always like to tell people, imagine that everybody listening to this podcast got Men in Black and forgot everything that they heard. But you have the ability right now to tattoo any wisdom on their soul that they'll take with them forever. What would your tattoo wisdom be for everybody listening?
Man, okay. I would just say this, no matter where you are, does not matter in terms of where you could be. And we've talked about all these things about leadership and management. My very first management job, within 9 months, I almost got fired. I did such a horrible job. And so when people hear me talk about these things now, they're like, man, you must be a real natural at this. I wasn't. I thought I knew a lot about management, but like the great, management guru, Mike Tyson, once said that everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. And I thought I knew a lot about management. I got into management and realized I was pretty ill-equipped for management. But if you have the heart for leading teams and growing organizations, there's no reason why you can't be the leader that you were born to be for your team. And there's a lot of leadership inside of you that just needs the opportunity for you to let it express itself, which means there's got to be humility, a subordination of your ego, and just a willingness to be open to new possibilities and ideas. And look, no matter where you're at, there's incredible things that can develop and grow from that. So that's the one thing I would say more than anything else. Because the last thing I would want someone to think is, gosh, this guy was just born to do this, so good at it. I wasn't. I mean, I really was on the brink of being fired. I was so terrible.
Yeah. And I've been fired many times, and I've had team members fire me, and I feel like the only time we lose this game is when we quit or think that we've already made it. Because I will say the biggest gift for me was becoming a parent and realizing that leadership and management is genuinely who you choose to be in that moment, not keeping yourself to who you were in the previous moment. And the rest of it's a muscle, and the more we practice it, the more we swing that, the more we use it, the better we get. And so I genuinely, man, like, I am so glad we connected a couple of weeks ago and had this. Awesome. Like this podcast was like a gift, genuinely for me. Your perspective, your insights, the view. I feel like I just got taken through a sermon of the best kind and surgery performed with some timely reminders and new ideas. And so, like, from the bottom of my heart, like, thank you for sharing your time with me. Thank you for coming on the show. All of that magic. And I appreciate it. So everybody listening, I would say, and I normally say this, that, don't ever let this become shelf help, but this might be the one that I reference anytime that I'm having a leadership issue or looking for certain questions. But I would go through this one and write down some of those notes and base some value-based leadership and choose to see your team as your teammates, not their roles and responsibilities, and create these shared missions and really utilize this, not as something that's one and done, but something that you practice and utilize every single day, because we really only are as strong as our weakest teammate. And that was one of the things that the Marine Corps taught me, is like, we only get home when everybody comes home, not when the front runners come home. And so we lead from the middle. You push people in front of you and you grab the people behind you, but we're on the field with them. And I think that that's the most powerful place to be. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart. For everybody listening, please make sure you connect with Brandon. We will get everything linked in the show notes. We'll be having more. I'm sure I'll have him back in the future because I want more of this. And so this has been another episode of The Mind of George. So you will either hear my crazy brain in the next episode, or you'll either see me in the next episode or you'll hear me in your earballs. But either way, we're out.